Hello and welcome to Changing What's Possible, the Disability Innovation Podcast brought to you by Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation, or CPARF. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and this season we are excited to bring you extraordinary stories about how disability, technology, and innovation come together. And today we are joined by our guests, Souvik Paul and Carina Ho. Listeners, Souvik is CEO and founder of Aurie, a startup company in our 2023 Remarkable US Accelerator Program. And he'll be talking more about Aurie in the first half of the episode. And in the second half, you'll hear from Carina Ho, who has had a spinal cord injury and will talk more about her experiences and how products from Aurie could help her and many others. So I'm looking forward to learning more about Aurie today. Souvik, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are excited to learn more from you today. Can you start by telling us more about yourself?
So I am an Indian American man, brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin. I am 33. I'm trained as an industrial designer with previous experience in finance, working on Wall Street. And I am currently the CEO and founder of Aurie.
Fantastic. So, Souvik, what actually motivated you to found your company, Aurie, and how did you get started on this adventure?
The story really dates back to when I was in my mid-20s. I had just gotten my first promotion at my first job and decided that I needed to leave finance before it had me for good. And I decided to go to graduate school to learn industrial design. And the idea that I had back then was that the design of physical products was one way of changing the world. And that's obviously like a very bold statement, and trust a 20-something-year-old to believe that they could be part of that change. But that was ultimately like what motivated me to apply to design school and throw my hat in the ring, so to speak. And 2 weeks before grad school started, I got a phone call. It was from Carina's older sister, Charlene. And she basically told me that while their family was on a road trip, there had been an accident and that I needed to fly to California right away. That moment was really my introduction to the world of disability, because as I found out, my partner's middle sister, Carina, sustained a spinal cord injury in a car accident. So I spent those 2 weeks prior to grad school really just in and out of the ER, just coping with the rest of the family in the wake of this car accident. And at some point I had to decide, do I go back to graduate school, which felt like a really, really selfish decision at the time, or do I stay in California and try to help out? And ultimately, I did decide to go to graduate school, but I resolved then that if design could really help change people's worlds, then it should be able to intervene in this moment. And so I decided to focus my graduate thesis on this idea of exploring how design could be used as a methodology to help improve the lives of people living with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities. So spent the 2 years in graduate school, focused my thesis on exactly that problem, and then ended up graduating, working at Johnson & Johnson. And then while I was at Johnson & Johnson, that was really my education in terms of how medical devices get designed and made. And along the way, I realized that if I wanted to translate any of the ideas from my graduate thesis to reality and see them have an impact on the world, I would have to kind of drop out of J&J and try to do it myself. And that was 5 years ago in 2018. So I've been working on Aurie ever since.
And I know that helping someone you care about can be a huge motivator. And it sounds like that was the case in your story here. So let's talk a little bit more about Aurie. What is Aurie's mission, Souvik?
Our mission is to design medical products and services with and not for the disabled community. So I realize how like my story sounds, like so selfless, so great. And it's not really like that at all. I think that especially when it comes to human-centered design, it's really important as a designer to not take on the savior mentality. I'm not saving anyone. The ideas behind Aurie's first product, which is a reusable no-touch catheter system, really stem from the experiences of people who have to use products like intermittent catheters every single day. And without that key insight, our company, our product wouldn't exist. And it's a big part of our mission as an organization to really champion the perspective of the end users whose health and quality of life we're trying to help improve with our products and services.
Certainly. And you mentioned this catheter system specifically. I know you're currently developing this reusable smart catheter system. So, but can you describe what this product looks like and maybe how it works?
First, it might be helpful to provide a brief overview on exactly what intermittent catheters are.
Mm-hmm.
When your typical person thinks of a catheter, they think of a tube that's inserted into your body that basically like passively drains urine into a bag of some kind. And that is a type of catheter. It's called an indwelling or Foley catheter. But when someone needs to use catheters in order to urinate for an extended period of time, usually they'll use what are known as intermittent catheters. So if you imagine a plastic straw with holes at either end, you're not too far off the mark in terms of what an intermittent catheter is. And the way these devices are used is when someone needs to go to the restroom to urinate, they bring a catheter with them, they insert it into their body, they allow urine to drain out of the body into a toilet or some kind of container. Then they actually remove that catheter and throw it out. And typically people use between 4 and 6 of these single-use intermittent catheters a day. Now, what the problem is that we're trying to solve is that with the standard types of catheters that are available for 70% of the user market, urinary tract infections are incredibly common. And UTIs for this particular part of the population tend to be more severe, tend to last longer, and just have many more negative impacts on quality of life than the UTIs that we might typically think of. And in fact, these UTIs go on to be a leading cause of death for people living with spinal cord injury. And with the standard catheters that 70% of people get, the annual UTI risk is around 50%, with most people experiencing between 1 or 2 UTIs. And over the course of a lifetime of using intermittent catheters, this becomes a really serious health problem. Now, on the other hand, there are safer catheters called no-touch catheters that basically prevent contact contamination during insertion. And these have been shown in clinical literature to reduce infection rates by 30%, which is pretty significant. The problem is that they're 4 times as expensive as standard catheters, so less than 7% of people get access to them. And what we are doing at Aurie is we've built a reusable no-touch catheter system that allows people to safely and automatically reuse their catheters while they're on the go so that we can afford to sell those catheters at the same price as the standard ones. And in doing so, we're hoping to increase access to this potentially life-saving technology. So in terms of what our product looks like and how it works, there are 3 parts. We have designed our own no-touch catheter. So basically, when someone goes to insert that catheter into their body, at no point are they touching the catheter itself. It just goes directly into their body. The second component of it is a portable catheter disinfector. So this is a device that is battery powered that automatically cleans, disinfects, and lubricates catheters within 30 minutes with the help of fresh water from the tap. And the third component of the system, which are prepackaged cleaning supplies. So these are basically detergent, hydrogen peroxide, and lubricant. And it's all contained in a compact footprint so that users don't have to really think about it. And the cleaning supply pod is good for a single day's worth of use.
Excellent. And you mentioned this straw analogy, and I think that really helps us envision how the product works. But what is it made of, or what does it look like from a size or texture standpoint?
So the device itself, like if you imagine a laptop and you're holding it in front of you so that it's landscape and you kind of cut it in half so that it's half the width, and you made that like 2 inches thick, that's like basically the size of the device. So it's around 10 inches by 6 inches by 2 inches, if that gives you a good sense of how big it is.
Excellent. And what is it made out of?
Well, it's a medical device. So it has the part that actually cleans and disinfects the catheter, has a plastic enclosure, circuit boards, like an aluminum manifold to help divert fluids throughout the system. So we're pretty proud of the engineering that's gone into it because it's pretty compact for what it is actually doing to the catheter to make it safe for reuse. The catheter itself is made out of medical grade plastic that you would see in implants and other things like that.
Oh, awesome. And you mentioned some of the benefits when it comes to it's reusable, the cost, lowering infection risk. If you had to give, I guess, the summary pitch of what problems this product is addressing, what would you say?
So I think the urinary tract infection risk is really the biggest pain point that we're trying to solve, just given how significant those impacts are to people who use intermittent catheters. In addition to that, there is a benefit of having a reusable system in terms of the overall sustainability of intermittent catheterization, more and more people that we've spoken to who use catheters do feel a sense of guilt about how much waste goes into just being able to go to the bathroom, which is one of those invisible costs of living with a disability that people who don't have that disability often don't think about. And intermittent catheters are estimated to contribute over 85 million pounds of plastic waste to landfills every year. So it is a pretty significant problem in aggregate. And then finally, especially as we come out and continue to develop the product and continue to develop future versions that are more compact, I think there's going to be a pretty significant lifestyle benefit in terms of adopting the system. Because today, the way that people plan for their day when they use intermittent catheters is think about when and where am I going to catheterize and how many supplies do I need to bring with me. And one of our goals with the system is to give users basically everything that they need to be able to switch their plans at a moment's notice and to have that freedom, flexibility, and spontaneity in their daily life. Now, that might take us some time to get to. As with all physical product development and technology development, you have to go through this iterative product development process, but that's what we're shooting for at the end.
Absolutely. And can you give us some insight into at what stage are you at with this iterative process?
So we are about to lock down the design for our initial FDA submission. So as you could probably imagine, the FDA process is a long one. That's for good reason. Just want to be completely clear about that.
Right.
With people's health, you need to make sure that what you're doing doesn't put anyone at risk. But basically, we are getting ready to finalize our design and do the extensive testing that's necessary for a successful FDA approval of our device. And we're planning to submit to the FDA by the end of this year and hopefully be in market sometime next year.
That is so exciting. Souvik, you talked about some of the benefits. Who do you think could benefit from using your products, this catheter system, maybe specifically?
I think definitely people who have conditions known as urinary retention or a neurogenic bladder. Some of the biggest user populations who use intermittent catheters on an ongoing basis include people living with spinal cord injury, spina bifida, multiple sclerosis. And then there are several other reasons why someone might need to use an intermittent catheter for an extended period of time.
Certainly. And I love earlier when you mentioned that you are designing with people with disabilities, not for people with disabilities. And I'd love to dig into that a little bit deeper. So like, how did you incorporate feedback or perspectives from people with disabilities in designing your products?
Well, the specific type of design that I've been trained in at the School of Visual Arts is human-centered design. And what that is basically an analytical and strategic framework for utilizing design as a methodology to solve problems. At its very core, it starts with user interviews and identifying unmet needs in whatever the field of inquiry is that you're interested in. And for me, that was designed for spinal cord injury and disability. And so actually the initial idea for the product, and it's morphed quite a bit since the initial conversations about it, came from a phone call that I had with Carina during my second year in grad school when I was talking about my thesis. And it was one of those moments where it was actually like super simple. Carina literally said, like, you know, what would be really helpful is like a way that I could safely reuse my catheters. And that is sort of where it started. Since then, we've made it a point to reach out to users in surveys, in one-on-one interviews, which we've conducted over 100 of. We've also done human factor studies where we put prototypes into users' hands and ask them to interact with them and give us feedback. I would say at this point, we've reached out to over 300 individuals who use intermittent catheters in order to get feedback on how to better design the device and make it more usable in everyday context.
Oh, I think that's so awesome. And I think having those conversations is so important for addressing the real world problems that people are having, not these problems that you may assume that people have. So was there anything that maybe surprised you in these conversations you were having with potential users?
A rule of thumb for user research is you keep doing interviews until you stop hearing new things. And after over 100 interviews with people about how they use catheters, the only thing I can conclude is that we've heard 100 different ways of using catheters. And all of the people that we've spoken to were incredibly open with us, which I really appreciate because it really helps in a development process like this. But we've heard people say that they reuse their catheters all the time and store them rolled up in their socks because they have a non-apparent disability and don't want to clue anyone else into the fact that they use catheters. We've talked to people who feel like they can't leave the house for more than 4 hours at a time because they want to structure their day around catheterization because it's such a big pain point for them. So we've really heard a tremendous range in terms of how people currently use catheters, why they use them, what issues they currently have with them, and how they've managed to adapt their life to needing to catheterize every 4 to 6 hours.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important to just have that deep understanding of what people are using now and how they're using it. So when designing your product, how does the Aurie catheter system differ from other products that are available on the market?
So everything on the market today is single use only. And actually, this was a change that happened relatively recently. Up until 2008, Medicare would only cover a limited number of intermittent catheters a month. And the expectation was that people would clean them out themselves by boiling them or microwaving them or washing them out with soap and water. In 2008, the rules changed and Medicare started to cover 200 single-use catheters a month for people who use intermittent catheters. Now, because of that, the entire industry shifted towards this practice of using single-use catheters. But recently, studies have shown that if you control the reuse method, it's actually not more dangerous to reuse your catheters. And there was a recent paper that was published that showed when you look at the actual healthcare statistics and data, there wasn't a meaningful decrease in UTI episodes in the U.S. writ large after this transition to single-use catheters when you looked at the healthcare costs and coverage episodes of people who use intermittent catheters. And so the situation that we're in right now is an interesting one because you have these technologies that, as I mentioned earlier, have been shown to reduce infection rates, but they're just too expensive for more than 7% of the population to get coverage for them. And so that's sort of where our approach comes in, where we are implementing reuse as a way to make this safer technology affordable. And there isn't another catheter on the market that is safely reusable or that pairs with technology the way that ours does in order to democratize access to this potentially life-saving technology.
Very cool. And I think, Souvik, in the context of technology, when people hear that a device kind of quote unquote pairs with something, their mind may immediately go to like a Bluetooth speaker or their earbuds. So can you explain this a little more?
By pairs with, I just meant our catheters can only be used with our cleaning and disinfection device. And that's for a multitude of reasons, FDA concerns, making sure that it's safe for the user, et cetera.
Oh, that makes sense. So only your catheters can be used with your catheter cleaning and disinfecting system. It's not like someone can just get the cleaning part and put any catheter in that part of the device for cleaning. And I know that your products have potential for big impacts for a lot of people, Souvik. And you mentioned you're at this stage now where you're starting to work on the FDA approval, which is an exciting time for the company. So what is your vision for the future of Aurie?
The way that I like to put it is, I think every year, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars are allocated towards lofty research goals like finding a cure for spinal cord injury or multiple sclerosis or spina bifida. And those are incredibly important things that, of course, we should devote energy and resources to as a society. But our perspective at Aurie is that you can't only focus on a cure. Because if you do that, then you leave behind hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who currently live with those conditions today, who have to use products that make them sick at an alarming rate. The tendency is to believe, like, why would you redesign an intermittent catheter if the cure for spinal cord injury is just around the corner? And I think having worked in healthcare and medical devices for basically the last 6 or 7 years, I know from experience that things aren't that simple. So our vision for Aurie is to kind of be that missing link in the ecosystem where we partner with people living with disabilities to understand where are their shortcomings in the current products that they rely on and to utilize the benefit and wisdom of lived experience to redesign those products to make an impact on quality of life and overall health today.
That is phenomenal. And I know you mentioned you're focusing at first on this catheter system. Do you have your eye on other products for sort of the next step?
We do, but we can't get ahead of ourselves or put the cart before the horse. We are pretty focused in on developing as good a product as we can, bringing that to market and iterating on that design. We've been fortunate to get several research grants to partner with universities like Texas A&M University and Binghamton University in order to develop sensor-enabled versions of our product. So we're really excited about that product pipeline as well.
So what will the sensors allow you to do?
Well, today, the way that a typical physician looks at urine is they use a tool called the urinalysis. And it basically looks at different biomarkers to understand what's happening with the urine. Is there an active infection or not, et cetera, et cetera. The issue with this is the urinalysis helps predict infection in someone who would traditionally be called healthy. But for someone who uses intermittent catheters regularly, the urinalysis is actually not that predictive, because you can't judge someone's health by that standard if they're using urinary catheters. And so the idea with the sensors are the urinalysis as a single snapshot in a single moment in time may not be predictive of infection. But if you gather those same data points every single time someone catheterizes 4 to 6 times a day, and you start plotting them, can you start to detect deviations away from that person's individualized baseline? And could those deviations be utilized to make preventative decisions around healthcare and things like antibiotic utilization, so that you're not necessarily prescribing antibiotics prophylactically, but you are utilizing that person's urinary data to make an educated decision about when they should make behavioral changes or use antibiotics in order to stave off an infection. This is all stuff that is currently in development. There's a lot of effort that will need to go into proving out the application before it could be used as a truly predictive tool. But that's one of the cool and novel things that having a reusable system can help unlock, because it would never make sense economically or otherwise to integrate sensors into a single-use product.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is a really exciting direction as well. And you and the team at Aurie are doing amazing work, Souvik. So if our listeners want to learn more about you and more about Aurie, where should they go or how should they do it?
We do have a website up. It's more of a landing page, but we're working on relaunching it. The URL is www.livewithaurie.com. That's LIVEWITHAURIE.com.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely check out this website. Keep an eye on the amazing work that the team at Aurie is doing. And Souvik, we really appreciate you joining us to share your insights and your experiences with our listeners today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciated it.
It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to welcoming our next guest on the show as well, listeners. I'm excited to introduce you all now to Carina Ho, who will be providing perspectives from her lived experience. So, Carina, welcome to the show today, and thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. So, to start off with, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
I am based in the Bay Area. I sustained a spinal cord injury 8 years ago in a car accident, as Souvik said. So since then, I've been really committed to disability inclusion. So that's actually a lot of the work I do.
Oh, very interesting. And if you're comfortable talking about it, Carina, can you tell us a little bit more about your spinal cord injury in detail?
Yeah, so I have a complete spinal cord injury at the T3 level. If you don't know what that means, that is essentially around my chest line. So below my chest, I don't have any function or sensation.
Certainly. And I understand you were involved in a car accident, as you mentioned, which I know is a traumatic experience. And then there's a lot of rehabilitation that comes afterwards. So what was this rehabilitation process like for you?
It was a pretty overwhelming process, as you could probably imagine. It entailed just retraining my body to function with paralysis. So a lot of that was developing strength, but just relevant to what we're talking about today, a lot of that was also navigating a newly acquired neurogenic bladder. So I kind of mentioned a lot of what goes into that, but it's introducing the usage of catheters, keeping them clean, making sure you understand the signals that your body's telling you when you have to go, because you no longer experience the same sort of sensations as you do pre-injury. So just learning to read all of those and know how to really just navigate bathrooms in a whole new way.
Absolutely. And I think one of the unique things about the disability community that we've mentioned previously on the show is you can join it at any time in your life. And I think it sounds like the case for you. So how has this injury changed your life?
I would say it changed pretty much every single aspect of it. Mm-hmm. I was injured at age 27. So before that, I knew nothing of having a disability. I was a healthy, non-disabled person living a pretty active life. So when you have that privilege, you never really have to think about anything like access or navigating the needs of your body. You sort of just have kind of built-in autonomy, and it's great. It makes things really easy. So when you're suddenly presented with kind of being at your body's whim, it really changes because it kind of dictates your life. Souvik mentioned some people can only leave the house for 4 hours at a time. Luckily, I am not one of those people, but I definitely feel a lot of anxiety if I'm not near, for example, an accessible bathroom. So a lot of planning and a lot of awareness goes into your everyday life, just managing your basic bodily functions.
Absolutely. And have you been able to continue working and kind of doing some of the things that you were passionate about?
Luckily, yeah. I feel very lucky that although my injury was very traumatic and still presents me with a lot of adversity on a daily basis, I've been able to reclaim a lot of normality from my old life. That includes a full-time job, a pretty robust social life. I have a lot of creative endeavors. I travel independently. So yeah, I think I've been able to really rediscover a new way of living that looks similar to my old life.
Certainly. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I know Souvik mentioned that you were a key inspiration behind Aurie. So Carina, what has it been like for you to see all of the progress that the company has made over the years?
Well, I'm really excited about it. It could potentially have a huge impact to the spinal cord injury community, as well as other communities that have neurological conditions. And I'm just very proud of Souvik.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you mentioned some of the impacts. Let's maybe dig into those a little deeper. So, Carina, what are some of these impacts, having lived through it yourself, that you think Aurie's products could have for users?
I think the misconception that a lot of people have of folks that are disabled is that they just willingly give up independence, autonomy, spontaneity. And there's a bit of an attitude of just deal with it and do the best you can, which to me isn't good enough. I would say no matter what age you are, if and when you acquire a disability, you still want to hold on to those aspects of your life. So if you want to leave the house for more than 4 hours, or you want to be able to travel with your friends or your family without having to worry about always being next to a bathroom, those are things that people want to be able to hold on to. So having products that enable us to do so are really impactful, because the market definitely has not addressed our needs in that way. The one-time catheter market, which is what we have today, basically requires, when I travel, to lug, depending on how long my trip is, potentially hundreds of catheters. And that's a lot of extra stuff you need to keep track of.
It's like a separate suitcase. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to lug so much stuff, and it really meddles in kind of your way of just existing as an unhindered person in the world.
Absolutely. And just that extra layer of planning, like you mentioned, can be a big burden. And we talked about spinal cord injury and in your case specifically. Who do you think, maybe thinking big picture here, Carina, could benefit from using this unique catheter system that Aurie is currently developing?
I mean, I would say people like me. I'm a young person, but age doesn't really matter, but I'm an active person. I like to have a full life where I don't have to constantly be planning around my bladder needs. So I think anyone in that category, this could be just a person who wants to go work in the office and not have to work at home anymore, or someone who loves traveling, or someone who just has a busy life and maybe you have kids and you don't have time to always be spending time in the bathroom. I mean, I think a lot of folks out there who may have neurogenic bladder can really relate to the fact that we spend a lot of time in the bathroom, and it's really not fun because it does eat into your day.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing all of this. I guess for listeners out there who may be interested, who may have some of these problems themselves, if they are thinking about trying Aurie's products in the future, what would you say to them?
Well, considering I haven't tried it myself, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I would be excited to just see the potential impact that it could have in my life.
Well, Carina, is there anything else you would like to share with listeners today about your experiences or the potential for innovation in this particular area?
You know, as someone who struggles with getting regular UTIs, I use public bathrooms. I think that the way that Souvik and this company and these types of products are thinking could potentially be really revolutionary, because not only do the products serve a very specific need for this community, it also reshapes the angle which people approach serving the disabled community, which is an inclusive lens. It's a holistic lens. So it's not just how do we address your bladder needs, it's how do we improve your quality of life. So I think for anyone out there who's also thinking about innovations, to really embrace that kind of lens, because not enough manufacturers and companies do approach it that way.
Absolutely. Well, Carina, I could not agree more. And we appreciate you sharing your insights and your personal story with all of us on the show today. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, well, it's been wonderful to have you with us, and listeners, great to have you all here with us as well. When you have a moment, please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform to make sure you don't miss our outstanding upcoming episodes. And we look forward to connecting with you again in our next episode of Changing What's Possible.